views and opinions expressed in this program are those of the participants and do not necessarily reflect the views of BronxNet or the program underwriters.
Reading or listening or watching, but you don't know exactly who. And so you can delude yourself and you can assume that there's no one in the audience who knows more about the topic that you're talking about than you do. And so therefore no one's going to laugh at you and think you a fool for trying to explain it in a ham-handed fashion. One discomfort for me today is that I do know exactly who my audience is, and I know that virtually all of you know more about this topic than I do. So I hope you will not laugh at me too extensively, or at least you'll wait for me to leave before you do so. And I hope that you accept my remarks today, certainly not as an expert opinion, but as a sense of what the city's fair housing law, whose 60th anniversary we celebrate here today, appears to an educated layperson to have accomplished, what it's failed to achieve, and the role it plays in the larger context of housing and inequality in New York City in 2017. And if there's any unique value to what I have to say, as opposed to some random person that might have been pulled off Grand Concourse, it's that as a member of the media, I help to shape the public conversation in the city, what we talk about, the policies we debate, and I also have some role in drafting what's known as the first draft of history, which is what journalists do. So, looking back at earlier drafts of history, I spent some of this week in a microfilm room looking at the New York Times coverage of the initial debate about the fair housing law. And it was in May 1957 that the Times broke the story that 3 city council members, representatives of the Republican, Democratic, and at that time relatively powerful Liberal Party, had come together to propose a first-in-the-nation law to restrict or prevent discrimination in housing involving solely private funding. The city had previously, in 1949, restricted racial discrimination in public housing. In 1954, it had done that for housing involving mortgages that had government support or financing behind them. And the previous year, the state had attempted to outlaw racial discrimination in privately financed housing and had failed. And so that was the context in which the city council, with the mayor's support, took up this issue. And the proponents of the law were pretty clear in what they wanted. They said, and the Times reported it this way, that an end to segregation, they asserted, was simply a matter of public policy. It was simply something the government was supposed to do. Needless to say, other people had other assertions, and it didn't take long for opponents to come out. The Times said that their contention is the bill would encroach on the freedom of the individual to use his own property as he chooses. And the Times said, real estate men, that was their term for the industry at the time, real estate men say that rather than guaranteeing to everyone the right to live in a place of his own choosing, this law could drive many residents out of the city by preventing landlords from selecting their tenants. Obviously, landlords were convinced, and eventually, frankly, so was the New York Times. In June of '57, it editorialized against the law. It said that, in principle, the objectives can't be opposed. They're admirable. But the method of compulsion is a dubious substitute for education and the admittedly gradual spread of understanding that can be the only sound foundation of complete neighborliness. Progress here, the Times said, must be a matter of education and spiritual growth rather than a consequence of legislation. Now, to today's ears, that sounds pretty lame. But apparently, back in the day, that was a persuasive argument because as the city council vote neared, the letters to Mayor Wagner were running 3,300 to 1,000 against this proposal. And so when the council went in to vote, and it was expected they were going to vote, they opted not to. The bill was pulled and shelved for several months. Now, what's interesting to me, and I think provides some guidance, is that we hear themes in that debate from 60 years ago that we've heard again time after time, and we hear still today when some of these questions come up. Themes like a deep aversion to interfering in what people refer to kind of dubiously as the free market. A fear that if you tinker with anything, people are going to flee the city. We hear that in terms of crime policy, other policies, that the drop of a hat, thousands of people are going to leave New York if you mess with the system. And finally, a belief by some that social change is a primary function of government, and others who couldn't disagree more. And these themes reared their head, recently. In 2008, the most recent major addition to the Fair Housing Law, the addition of source of income discrimination. When Mayor Bloomberg vetoed that law, his message said that while it was well-intentioned, it would, quote, force private landlords to participate in a public program, even at a cost to their bottom line. It is a solution in need of a problem. And the mayor suggested that building more affordable housing was a better answer than preventing this form of discrimination. Now, the good news is that while these kind of intensely conservative instincts do thread through policy discussions past and present, the fight over the Fair Housing Law is proof that leaders with some commitment to general principles and with some political savvy can overcome them. In 2008, of course, Mayor Bloomberg's veto was overturned and the law was amended. In 1957, it became an issue in that year's mayoral campaign, and Mayor Wagner was hit from both sides. Supporters of the Fair Housing Law said that he had abandoned it, that he was not fighting hard enough for it. Opponents kept hammering him for his support of the initial draft. And he didn't do anything on it until he soundly beat his Republican opponent, Robert Christenberry, by a comfortable 1 million votes out of 2 million cast. Within days, he moved to have the law revived, and it was passed in December. The Human Rights Commission, which was then called the Committee on Intergroup Relations, was charged with enforcing it. The criminal penalties that were originally part of the bill were taken out of it, which is too bad. It'd be nice to be able to arrest people now and then, but those were taken out. Despite that, though, Local Law 80 was really a landmark. It was really the first time in the United States that they had attempted to prevent discrimination in purely privately financed housing. And it's considered a milestone in anti-bias legislation. It survived a legal challenge in 1960 when a landlord said that the existence of black tenants would reduce his rental income. The court threw that argument out. And it was obviously followed up by laws at the state and then federal level in 1968. But it was certainly a landmark. However, it was not long after its passage that people began asking, well, so what? We've passed a law, what's the impact been? And as early as 1962, the commission itself looked back on the law and tried to assess the progress it had made in its first 3 years of actual existence. And looking back at the debate in '57, the commission wrote at the time, or its authors wrote, mindful of the ethnic composition of New York, many friends and foes of the new legislation anticipated massive population shifts as the city's minorities seized the opportunity to move out of overcrowded, segregated neighborhoods into neighborhoods from which custom formerly had excluded them. The opponents, the commission related, believed that the law would incite racial strife and mass disobedience, that the fact that it would be hard to enforce would promote disrespect for all law in general. And its supporters held out the major hope that the law would significantly undermine the custom of segregation in housing. Those were the hopes. And in '62, the commission concluded that the reality, and I'm quoting here, has been far less spectacular. It brought the city neither to catastrophe nor to utopia. And that diagnosis or that judgment has been repeated periodically. In '84, the New York Times wrote an article about how the law was great, commission was fine, but the enforcement mechanisms were really too weak to make a big difference. In 1995, in a paper that was generally very supportive of the commission, the economist and academic Michael Schill wrote that residential segregation was still sky high in the city, that most people in New York lived in highly segregated neighborhoods. And today, we all know what reality is. We all know discrimination still occurs. We all know segregation still exists. There has been an argument that segregation has been in some way dramatically reduced, or some even have said ended. But that's not true. The Center for Urban Research concluded a couple of years ago that of the 29,000 or so census tracts in the city, or census blocks, in the city, 85% of them have the same predominant racial or ethnic population in 2010 as they did in 2000. And this is true not just of New York. On the national level, too, HUD does a lot of regular testing and has found that while overt forms of discrimination have decreased, that more subtle ones still exist. And so the underlying issues that were there in 57 do, to some degree, still persist. And so do some of the debates. What's frustrating about the debate about the federal law on affirmatively furthering fair housing is that the notion that federal housing law is not supposed to just prohibit discrimination, but actually work to undo the legacy of past discrimination, that's in the original text of the law passed in 1968. But we are still debating basically whether or not the federal government meant it or not. So that's frustrating. And it raises the question, I think, today of, are we simply running in place? Is the fair housing law a solution in search of a problem, expanded every few years in a desperate search for relevance, or a solution constantly eluded by the problem, chasing a ball it's never going to catch? As you might expect, as someone who was invited to give the keynote, my conclusion to those questions is no. I don't think it's quite that hopeless or empty. In general, fair housing laws have and continue to have real impact. Take the affirmatively furthering fair housing rule imposed by HUD very controversially. Trump has talked about revoking it. In just its first year of existence, according to Slate, HUD ordered 22 jurisdictions to comply with the rule, including big cities like Philly, Kansas City, New Orleans, and they had to do real things. Philly had to look at its evictions problem. Kansas City had to look at its Section 8 problem. And the author, Jake Blumgart, writing at Slate, concluded, and I think he puts the right finishing touch on it, these kinds of steps may be tentative, but they were unthinkable even a decade ago. So that rule has had an impact. Similarly, here in New York, if you think about the way that this law has evolved from, as the commissioner said initially, talking about race, national origin, to now include gender discrimination, sexual orientation, gender identity, age, presence of children. It's been a pretty nimble law for that many iterations to have occurred over 60 years. And pretty timely, too. If you think about it, the most recent innovation, as we said, was the addition of source of income discrimination in 2008, and that is now the issue today. When we look at the homeless crisis, the effort that Mayor de Blasio has made, create vouchers to get people out of the shelter system, problems that people are having getting landlords to honor those vouchers, that is a key housing issue today, and the law has been changed 9 years earlier to deal with it. And in fact, you see that in the commission's numbers. In 2016, of all the housing cases the commission handled, 129 were for claims of source of income discrimination. That was the highest group. Race was 65, national origin 29. So this is kind of where the rubber meets the road, and the law was ready for it. Now, those are pretty small numbers, 129, 65 in a city of 8 million people and growing, heading toward 9 million. And some people would take that as a knock on the impact of the law. But I'll reject that. And I think there's a movement in government, there has been for 10 to 15 years. Mayor Bloomberg was, much to his credit, a big part of it, of introducing metrics to our assessment of whether a government program or a law is valuable or not. And I think that's certainly an important part of the picture, but it's not the whole picture. The impact of a program is simply more than the numbers that an agency enforcing it can report. You don't know if the lack of larger numbers reflects that people aren't in need of the program or simply that they don't know about it. And you don't know how many problems you prevent through deterrence rather than enforcement. This is the logic behind a police department, and it's the logic behind the Human Rights Commission. So I don't think the numbers itself are what we should worry about. And the fact is the commission is sending a strong message. Last year it fined a landlord $100,000 in civil penalties for refusing to rent to a Section 8 tenant. Landlords make, many of them, a lot of money, but $100,000 is going to make a lot of people stand up and pay attention. So a deterrent message is clearly being sent. However, there are challenges for all of us who care about the law, for the commission, for people who write the law and enforce it. Differences between now and 57 are pretty clear, right? Inequality is one. Back then, clearly there was income inequality, but now you have apartments that are so far out of reach that they really make it difficult for people to find any alternative within the 5 boroughs. And that also increases the rewards, the incentives to landlords to behave badly, because the prize of a better heeled tenant is that much more lucrative. You also have much more contested territory, areas that before were considered segregated. In those reports from 1962, they would have referred to them as the ghettos. Those are now contested territory in the discussion about gentrification and displacement. The stakes seem higher now. Housing's always been a pretty high stakes issue, but the fact that we have 58,000 people in our homeless shelters indicates that this is a very, very serious problem. And the impact of not necessarily housing discrimination, but of challenges to finding decent, safe housing, which was the goal of the law, have become simply more broadly felt. Even as recently as '95, that paper by Michael Schill, people who were paying more than 35% of their income in rent was 41%. Today it's 46 or higher. Back then, more than 50% was about 27. Now it's nearly a third. So you have a fundamental and widespread threat to the city. And what that means is that, in many ways, more potential clients for the law to protect, but maybe a harder time protecting them. And the responsibility for figuring that out obviously falls to the mayor. As Councilman Mayor de Blasio was the sponsor of the law that expanded the jurisdiction of the Fair Housing Law to source of income discrimination. And we cover his housing program and his housing policy daily, and I think it's a statement of fact that he has made a deeper effort than any mayor, certainly in my relatively short lifetime, to achieve affordable housing and try to keep a foothold for low-income and working-class people in the city through the mandatory inclusionary housing zoning provision, through the addition of right to counsel for folks facing eviction in housing court. But he is being pushed by advocates to do more because he faces a much, much more serious crisis than his predecessors, and because he elevated expectations to a higher level because he got it. And I think the Commission on Human Rights reflects this dynamic. The Commission's headcount, according to IBO, the Independent Budget Office, fell to 59 in fiscal 13, which was its lowest level, at least since 1980. According to the most recent count by IBO, which might be a little dated, it's now at 88. That's a very significant increase. That is still well below the 1991 high of 223 positions. So the question is, are we equipping the council, the mayor, all of us, this enforcement mechanism to keep up with this vast challenge it faces? Another even more awkward problem is that the mayor's main solution to the affordable housing issues facing our city is to create a denser city, more housing, more affordable housing, try to take some pressure off. And one of the main tools for that is the neighborhood rezonings, which we cover at zonein.org and City Limits all the time. The mayor intends those rezonings to help with the affordable housing problem. There are fears that in some ways it could contribute to it because of secondary effects, because affordable housing is sometimes priced out of reach of people who most need it. And so it has raised the concern among some advocates that rezonings cause displacement. The mayor rejects that, says the evidence is that rezonings follow market patterns and hope to channel them for a better public good. But the evidence, frankly, is not solid for either side. And what it means is there's a risk. There's a risk that rezonings will exacerbate housing pressure, and that risk is going to be predominantly borne by low-income neighborhoods of color. That's simply a fact, because that's where the rezonings are. So we must keep all this in mind. And what I tell students, the last time I was in this building was to teach last fall a 10-week course for investigative reporting, teaching Bronx high school students how to do what I do. And what I tell them is one of the key things is to always keep your 5 questions in mind, the reasons you're doing the reporting, the reasons you want to write the story. And so I offer to you 5 questions that I have in mind for how I plan to cover this issue, and you might answer them for me or you might ask them of yourselves. One is, does the law need further tweaking? Right now the law is pretty expansive, certainly in terms of what it applies to. There are exemptions for very small properties with owner presence in them, owner-occupied properties of some types. As the owner of a 2-family house, I don't know that I should be exempted from the catchment area of the law. I think that's an active question. Do people know about the law still, 60 years later? Do people know this mechanism is out there? I would say, as someone who has tried to publicize a 40-year-old media entity for 10 years and still runs into people who ask me if City Limits is like a car dealership or a deli in White Plains, which in fact it is. I would say it is likely that people still don't know. You can never, ever push for public awareness strongly enough. Is desegregation still a goal that we commonly hold? I think this is a thorny question. That was obviously a motivating factor for the law in 1957. In 95, Michael Schill wrote that surveys at the time showed that white people preferred neighborhoods in which no or very, very few black people lived, and people of color tended to prefer neighborhoods that had an equal balance of whites and people of color. I haven't seen any numbers, but I wonder if that is still true in our city, where you have white people, in many cases, let's call it fetishizing diversity, feeling some moral comfort from having a diverse neighborhood because they can afford to be there in some cases, and people of color feeling as though, given the overlap between race and income, that having a diverse neighborhood can be a threatening thing. I think that's a real sentiment on the street, and we have to think about what that means. I don't feel like you have to agree with Craig Garrian's suit to undo community preference in affordable housing. That's the mechanism by which, when the city builds affordable housing, there's a preference for people in the neighborhood. There's a lawyer who's suing the city saying that that exacerbates segregation. You don't have to buy that to acknowledge that there are some thorny questions for us to wrestle with. A key one for the moment is, can the city continue to extend these protections to undocumented people? I feel like that's critical, and that's a challenge, obviously, that goes to larger issues facing our city. And finally, the big question, the intersection between legal rights and economic reality. What does fair mean in terms of fair housing when you simply can't afford to live in the city? When you can't even think to step into the door with the basic ability to afford an apartment and even give someone the chance to discriminate against you because of your race or your age? I think that's an active question we all have to wrestle with. A final point is that what I tell my journalism students here, and I'm sure most of you get this, but I'd like to reiterate it, is that it's important that we all stay angry about this. When you think about where we were 60 years ago, it's stunning that it required months of debate and a city election to convince New York that it was time to say that it's wrong to discriminate against people based on their race when they're just trying to rent an apartment. That was a debate then. We wouldn't think of having that debate now, I hope. That kind of overt racism is something that we simply have pushed out of our mind. And so the idea that that sense of right or wrong that's part of our mental landscape, and it's there, and that's a good thing. But people can also get used to injustice, especially when it's common, and especially in a city where a lot of people are feeling squeezed. There's not a lot of sympathy for folks who say they're not getting an apartment because of their color or their creed or their immigration status. People will say, well, I'm not getting an apartment, period. We have to make sure we find a way to articulate this case still. And so it's going to be hard work for many of you in this room to keep people focused and fired up. And I really respect folks who dedicate themselves to do this every day. And I would just ask you to keep working, to keep talking to the media, and to keep channeling your inner Mr. T.
We're here to see the apartment. It's just been rented. Hey, fool! You can't keep people out because of their race, creed, color, sex, age, or handicap. And that's the law. And the T-Force will enforce that law in court. If discrimination is keeping you out, you call the New York City Fair Housing Task Force.
The T-Force can open doors for you.
So we may not have the mohawk, or the chains, or the biceps that Mr. T does, or the t-shirt, but we've all got a role in ensuring fair housing remains part of this city's evolution toward a better New York. Thanks very much for having me.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Elizabeth Osley, and I'm a staff attorney with the Law Enforcement Bureau of the Commission, along with my colleague, Christopher Binns. And today we're going to talk about identifying tenant harassment and lawful source of income under the New York City Human Rights Law, and when you see it, how you can file a complaint regarding those issues.
So before we get started, I just want to give a brief overview of what we do in the Law Enforcement Bureau. The Commission on Human Rights, we're tasked with enforcing the human rights law. We do that through the Law Enforcement Bureau, where we are attorneys, and Just a brief overview, we investigate complaints that are either filed by attorneys, a member of the public, or something that we may see on our own. And once we investigate them, if we find something that violates the law, we'll negotiate some type of settlement and potentially mediate some disputes. If a case is not settled, we refer the case and we'll have an administrative hearing on it to make a determination whether discrimination occurred. So that's basically what we do in the Law Enforcement Bureau. The Commission on Human Rights, the law covers employment, housing, public accommodation, discriminatory harassment, and bias-based police profiling. Our statute of limitations is 1 year, so if something happened within the year, we can help you. If something has been continuing to be happening over the number of years, we likely can help you, but our law limits us within the 1 year statute of limitations, and we only cover the 5 boroughs, so the Bronx, Manhattan, Staten Island, Queens, and Brooklyn. We don't cover Long Island or Westchester or anything like that. So, what's tenant harassment? Tenant harassment happens when you have the owner or some type of agent of the owner, so the super or somebody with the management company who's looking to intimidate or coerce a tenant to do something based on a protected class. Now, the protected classes, they range from a wide variety: race, national origin, sexual orientation, victims of domestic violence, various things like that. And what does that look like? You have an owner or an agent taking some type of adverse action, whether that's turning off the hot water, not fixing the elevator, different things like that to get people out of their apartment based on the protected class. Now, the protected class is the most important aspect of this discussion because the protected class is what brings in our law, which brings in the jurisdiction of the commission. Without providing connection between whatever the protected class may be and the adverse action on the part of the owner or the agent, we can't act on it. Oftentimes, that's a lot of what our investigations entail, to determine whether there is an investigation, but when people believe that they are being discriminated based on whatever the protected class may be, that's when we come in. So basically, there are bad landlords, but not all bad landlords invoke our law and our jurisdiction. So what's an adverse action look like? There aren't really any limits. It all depends on the situation. You may have one floor that aren't getting any repairs, and that floor happens to have most of the Latinos on the floor, right? So different things like that. Or a new owner comes into the building and they want to renovate the building, but the construction's happening at 7 a.m. or 9 at night, the non-business hours, trying to get people out of there. Those are the type of things that we look at in terms of adverse actions. But as I mentioned before, those adverse actions have to be connected to the protected class. And here's a list of the classes that are protected by our law. So gender, disability, age, various different types of things. New York's a diverse city, so there's a lot of different people and a lot of different reasons why a landlord may be acting a certain way. And also, the adverse actions can come in the form of overcharging rent, harassing phone calls, illegal lockouts, all these different types of things. Usually everything is done on a case-by-case basis, but the important part with respect to tenant harassment is providing that connection between the protected class and the adverse actions. Now, oftentimes, people are afraid to come forward because they feel that they'll be retaliated against by the landlord, right? So they're afraid to do something about it because they don't want to be made example of. The law also protects those types of actions. And it's considered reasonably likely to deter a person from engaging in protected activity. That's a broad definition, and those are things that we look into. So for example, say a tenant or a group of tenants come to the commission, they file a claim about something that's happening in the building, and because of that, the landlord puts them on the tenant blacklist, right? We would consider that as retaliation because they're doing something when they're invoking their rights. And other different things, like if the super says, hey, I wouldn't do that, the landlord's gonna get mad at you, we would look into that and consider that retaliatory conduct. Not renewing leases, and other forms of intimidation that we all see on a daily basis. So that's the gist of tenant harassment. It's really about connecting the adverse actions with the protected class. And now we're going to talk a little bit about source of income.
So source of income discrimination is something that we see at the commission a lot, unfortunately. And so lawful source of income discrimination has some basic elements to file a claim under our law. So the elements are that the owner or a managing agent of a building or a super or any agent of the owner of a housing accommodation takes some sort of action, so refuses to rent or lease a housing accommodation, refuses to process paperwork, or discriminates in the privileges of a housing accommodation, so refuses to treat someone with, say, a Section 8 voucher the same as people without vouchers. And it's the action that the landlord takes is, again, that connection because of the lawful source of income. So what is lawful source of income under our law? It's very broad. It's any form of federal, state, or public cash assistance or government housing assistance voucher program. Things like Social Security are considered lawful source of income, as well as the different voucher programs throughout the city, Section 8, HASA, things like that. So who is liable? When you are discriminated against based on your source of income, who do we file the complaint against? And we can file the complaint against a number of individuals. Typically, it's the landlord or owner of the building. In cases where there's a managing agent or a managing company, and they're the bad actor, we can file against them. What's great about our law is we can also file against brokers. So if your client or you have a broker that says, don't submit your application there, the landlord's not going to take Section 8. This landlord doesn't take this program. That broker is then liable under our law. And also, the one caveat is that the landlord has to have at least one building in New York City that has 6 or more units. So if the building you're looking at may only have 3 units, but it's a big landlord and you know that they have a building with 100 units down the block, then they would still be liable under our law. The types of claims we see most often with lawful source of income are tenant harassment, which Chris touched on and talked about. Refusal to rent, I would say, is the most obvious and the most common. Retaliation. And it's also important to know that even if you are not the Section 8, if you're not the voucher holder, but you're still in the apartment, you're still in that unit, you can also be discriminated against. The examples that we see most often of lawful source of income, again, are just flat out refusals to rent. So you call a broker, say, I saw your ad online, I'm interested in this apartment. The broker says, we don't take programs. The landlord says, we don't take programs. Refusing to process renewal paperwork. One thing that we have been seeing is that the landlord refuses to rent unless you make 40 times the rent. If you have a voucher or some sort of assistance that covers your rent, then there's no need for you to make that 40 times. And so that's a pretextual way to discriminate. Again, like Chris said, not doing repairs for people who are voucher holders, but doing repairs for everyone else in the building who are paying their rent. The law specifically prohibits advertisements that refuse to accept vouchers. So an example is on Craigslist. You know, I'm sure you've all seen it, that say, no pets, no this, no vouchers. That is a per se violation of our law, and you are welcome to file your own complaint or call in and have our testing unit look into it, but those are just blatant violations of our law. Some of the common complaints that we hear from complainants and what they hear are, do you have any other income? This program's fine, can someone guarantee the rent? Is there anyone else you can put on the lease? All things that, again, may not sound like discrimination, and they may sound like they're actually trying to work with you. But again, it could be a pretext just to not accept whatever lawful source of income Another big one is that Section 8 takes too long to inspect your apartment, or that I can't pass the inspection. Again, that would be discrimination under our law. We also see a lot of overlapping claims with lawful source of income, especially I would say in disability, depending on the type of voucher that you have. So for HASA, for example, we usually dual file those claims so that it's lawful source of income and a disability if someone identifies that they have a disability. Also age and your lawful occupation are other overlapping claims. One of the good things for the commission and the law is that a landlord is not allowed to use administrative inconvenience. So again, they can't say, it's going to cost too much money to make the repair so that it'll pass an inspection, or the Section 8 paperwork takes too long. Unfortunately for the landlords, that's not a defense, and you have to be compliant with the rules of Section 8, and you also can't use those rules to then not rent people. That also applies to delays in processing the paperwork. For the most recent decision that came out from the commissioner, the decision and order in Augusto, there the commission found that the complainant had a security voucher from HRA which guaranteed, in lieu of her paying a security deposit up front, HRA granted her a security voucher. The landlord decided that they weren't going to accept that. The commission ruled that that was unacceptable and that security vouchers in this instance were considered lawful source of income. Also, with regards to the 6-room minimum requirement, if you have 6 individual rooms that are used as a housing accommodation for individuals, that can tie you into under our law, even if maybe the building's not zoned or is not stated to have 6. Maybe it says it only has 3, but if they're actually illegally converting them, then that can bring in the New York City human rights law. In that case, the commission ordered respondents to pay $13,000 in emotional distress damages and also $20,000 in a civil penalty, which is a big way that the commission can deter landlords from further discriminating. We also always have affirmative relief, such as training in the New York City human rights law so that they don't repeat the same acts, as well as posting notice of rights posters so that everyone in that building or in that area or under that management agent's control is aware of their rights under the New York City human rights law. And so now Chris is going to talk about the rules of filing complaints. So if you're an attorney and a complainant or a client comes to you and you have a case, you can draft your own complaint and submit it to us for investigation.
So we talked a lot about what we do and how we do it, but the complaint is the mechanism that we use to investigate issues. And there are some basic rules. They have to be typed and they have to be signed and verified by the complainant. So for the attorneys out there, everything has to be verified because we're taking those assertions as allegations and we're going to pursue an investigation based on those. You have to include the name of the complainant and the respondent in a caption. This is the caption that we prefer everyone to use. This is the caption that we use in our own complaints. This is also available on the website if you need to reference it, and it's also in your materials. So the complaints, they have to include the parties and the jurisdiction. We need the complainant's name and the address for service. We also need the complainant's attorney and contact information. The protected class has to be clearly identified, and the respondent's name and address have to be included. Particularly with source of income, you have to allege how many apartments, how many units they have. All these things are important because once a complaint is filed with us, we serve all the parties. So we're not going to go look for addresses if an attorney files a complaint. We're going to go off what's on the complaint. The factual allegations. We need them to be as specific as possible, right? So we need the location of the building. We need whatever the questions may be that you want us to address within that building to be included in the complaint. names, dates, methods of communication. The methods of communication are important because that's going to guide our investigation. So we're going to know where to look. We're going to know whether it's text messages, whether it's emails, whether it's memos. We'll be able to focus our investigations better. And as we keep reiterating throughout this presentation, there has to be a clear connection within the complaint between the protected class and whatever the adverse act is. Because again, that is what gives us jurisdiction over whatever the issue may be. Charging paragraphs. Oftentimes when we have attorney file complaints, they'll have in the last paragraph saying the respondents discriminated against the complainant in violation of the human rights law. That doesn't really help us. We need the attorneys to identify the section in the statute that's been violated, identify the protected class that's been violated. Here's some examples of the type of language that we use in our complaints, and we just prefer that attorneys model this because, again, this is about guiding the investigation. It helps us in our approach when moving forward.
Okay, so the process, if you decide to file an attorney-filed complaint with us, is pretty simple. You take your verified complaint and the intake sheet that the commission provides, and you email it to the listed email address, leb@cchr.nyc.gov. Once it is received by the docketing clerk, then it's deemed filed. So again, it has to be filed within the 1 year, with the exception of a continuing violation, but 1 year is the general rule. And then what happens is LEB will serve, or the Law Enforcement Bureau will serve all the parties, including the complainant and the respondent. So that's again why it's important that in the actual complaint, we have the correct respondent, we have the correct address, and the correct contact information. Like Chris said, we just are taking attorney-filed complaints on their merits, and so we're not checking or double-checking. So please make sure that they're correct. We're not going to amend it unless it becomes necessary later in the process. One of the things with filing with the commission and in the Law Enforcement Bureau is once you file, then what happens is we get an answer from the respondents. We send that back out to the complainant's attorney for a rebuttal. Once we receive that rebuttal, the commission and LEB then works as a neutral fact finder. So our investigations are confidential. So we can request additional information, and we're more than happy to give status updates to everybody, but we're not allowed to disclose what is actually going on in the investigation, the very particulars of it. So if you file your complaint and we decide or we find that there's probable cause or we are able to settle the case, some of the potential relief that we look for are damages for the complainant, which include emotional distress and compensatory damages. Like we said earlier, civil penalties, which can go up to $250,000 against the respondents for willful and wanton violations of the law. We also are very interested in seeking affirmative relief, and that helps vindicate the Commission's public interest to try and stop and eradicate discrimination from going forward within the city. We almost always require policy changes, especially in instances where they either have no policy or their stated policy is we don't accept vouchers. That obviously would have to change. Monitoring, which is really, really great. We have a testing unit at the commission. So if we include monitoring, they need to make their policy changes, and then to ensure that they're actually implementing those changes, we can send out testers every 3 months, every 6 months, or however many months is necessary to ensure that they actually are complying with their stated changes. And then also for brokers or realtors who refuse to cooperate with the law and comply with the law and continue to put out that this landlord doesn't accept vouchers, this landlord doesn't accept this type of income, we can also report them to the New York State Division of Licensing Service, because brokers and real estate agents are also required to undergo anti-discrimination training. And that's just some of the relief that we seek on a daily basis. This is just a flow chart of the process that LEB undergoes. And so at this point, for CLE credit, please remember to sign out so that you get it. And if anyone has any questions, we can do our best to try and answer them.
Yes. just wanted to bring out that harassment can sometimes come from a neighbor, and the kind of harassment that can come from the neighbor can sometimes occur in home ownership situations as well as rental situations. Thank you. Were you able to hear me?
Yes.
So I was wondering if you had any comment on that.
Okay, so the question was that harassment does not have to just be landlord to tenant. It can also be tenant to tenant or even in homeowner situations.
Right, from neighbors.
Yeah, so I think that we also have a discriminatory harassment provision of our law. And so if you are either your neighbor or your landlord or an owner, a tenant neighbor or an owner neighbor, if you are being threatened or harassed in a more menacing way, then that would likely fall under discriminatory harassment, which is another provision in our law.
Because remember, when we're talking about tenant harassment, one of the elements, it has to be the owner, the super, some type of agent of the owner that's discriminating against the tenant based on the protected class. If it's tenant to tenant, that will invoke a different provision of our law.
Well, but does the Human Rights Law have a provision in it? I thought it did, that says that anyone that tries to interfere with somebody's exercise of their...
Yes, that will be discriminatory harassment, which is not necessarily limited to housing. It could be pretty much any member of the public.
Thank you.
Do you want to pass your mic?
Yes, my name is Craig Martin. Saturday, I spoke to a landlord, actually in Brooklyn, because I have a Section 8 HUD-VASH voucher. I'm a veteran. And I'm getting Social Security as well, because I had a stroke. He talked to me, yes, we take the HUD-VASH voucher, everything is fine. You have the Social Security disability, just bring all your paperwork. So Monday I went and looked at the apartment, and the apartment was beautiful. The only problem was the apartment was in Bay Ridge. When I went to the landlord's office, the minute he saw me, it was over. He goes and he tells me, oh, you know what? I realized we don't take Section 8. And I'm a veteran, and I noticed the area was beautiful. I don't know if you've been to Bay Ridge, but it's very, very nice and clean, everything out there. But unfortunately, I didn't see too many people of color.
Well, so that's something that we would investigate, and we are going to be available to have some intake forms that we can talk to you later about that.
All right. And one last thing is, I went and saw another apartment.
Well, if it's another example...
No, it's not that.
Oh, okay.
Where the super told me if I gave him $800, he would get me the apartment. Now, is that a violation against the landlord because that super is his representative or what?
Well, we'd have to talk more about that. I don't know if that invokes our law, but we can talk more offline about that.
All right.
I think there was a question over here in the blue jacket.
Right here first.
Hi, I would like to know about the Discrimination Act against HASA. I was placed there in 2013. I was given one caseworker that took me to see one apartment. She never showed back up, never answered a call. To date, I'm still there. My children and myself have contracted the MRSA virus to no avail, which is a flesh-eating bacteria. Mine was at a normal level at such a high rate that they didn't know how I survived. As soon as I got to HASA, I went and signed every application for an apartment. No one, just like this gentleman, once seeing me, I don't think I have to present myself in a situation whereas I'm approved or I'll take you. But I'm here now because I'm sick, and my son is right now having the MRSA-infected cataracts removed from his eyes. He's an engineering student. He's 20 years old.
That's also something that we can talk about offline.
But also, sir, in closing, related management is so discriminatory that my son was born in 1990. I have two boys with me. They had me do all the paperwork. I bought everything, supported everything they needed. I can understand being refused for one thing, but 8 different reasons? Telling me my son stole a car in 1997. He was born in 92. I went to the motor vehicles and got an abstract record. No one in that year, that date of birth ever existed. Afterwards, they told me that I didn't pay the rent in my last apartment. I went to the housing court. The judge himself wrote a letter.
Ma'am, I understand, but we can absolutely talk about that very specific situation after line. We're going to be
let's
here.
Talk about it because I don't want to bury no more kids.
We will.
I do think that both of you raised a great point about how intersectionality works together and how, like we mentioned, that there are several overlapping claims. And sometimes, landlords do give a pretextual reason, and that's one of the things that we investigate. So if you come in and we talk about this and you meet with an attorney, or if an attorney is filing a complaint on behalf of someone, then those are things that we definitely have to look into. They take, we do deep investigations, and these are exact examples of why we're so invested in our work, because it's usually, no one's going to say, well, obviously people say no vouchers, no problem, but usually it is hidden under these multitude of different reasons, and that's the goal of the commission, is to investigate those and try and stop those problems from continuing.
I'm sorry, sir. We have to take our turns. Go ahead.
Hi. My question is just, how fast can you guys work when someone refers a complaint to you? And just as an example, I work with a lot of clients who are trying to find housing. A lot of them are on public assistance, for example, so they're relying on vouchers for security deposit. It's great to know there's a decision that cannot be rejected, but the reality of most people's lives is that it will be rejected. And what I'm asking is, like, what confidence can you give people that if they file that complaint, there's going to be some outcome that will benefit them, because people are struggling trying to find housing, and to stop and make a complaint against 10 different places that are telling them the same thing is a lot. And not that it's not worth it, but how fast can you turn it? Is there a way that you can actually help increase someone's chances for getting a specific apartment if a voucher is rejected?
So that's a great question. Unfortunately, our investigations do take time. They are sometimes lengthy because they are thorough. The best course of action, I think, in cases like that we do have a pre-filing unit, so you can submit that case, and then someone from the commission is able to call out to that landlord and essentially put them on notice, give them the courtesy that maybe they don't know about the law, but this is the law, and you must comply with it. Failing to comply with it will result in us filing a complaint and, aggravated civil penalties if the case calls for it. I think also what's great is for prospective tenants to know their rights. And I think that it is helpful for a tenant to be able to say, this sounds like discrimination, this is against the law, the New York City Human Rights Law prevents this exact type of discrimination, and I will file a complaint. And you cannot do this. And a lot of times a landlord will ignore that or reject that. But I think that first step of even advocating for yourself or having an attorney try and intervene before we file can often lead to a quicker result. And you can still file as well. We can intervene, and then we can also file the complaint going forward. Okay.
I'm sorry. Actually, we're out of time. We'll be available though. Sorry.
Yeah, so we'll be available in the back. So if anyone has individual questions, either at the end of the panel or in the break between the two sessions, we're more than happy to talk with each and every one of you. Sorry. Thank you.
We are together. And for the last 20 years, we have been building on a vision to share our views, our voices on our channels. We are the Bronx. We are BronxNet.
I got this as a paid internship. Spending my time here, I really enjoyed the people that work here. I enjoy what goes on behind the scenes.
So far, I've learned how to operate a camera, how to host. I learned how to control audio.
My first time hosting was really nerve-wracking, but I really enjoyed it because it was a new experience.
Coming to you from our BronxNet studios, 4 new shows highlighting some of the best of the Bronx has to offer. We sit down with political leaders on In the District and discuss local legislation, events, and issues. See how the community and business come together with The Bronx Now on BronxNet. Nosotros features leaders from our Latino community. Meet those who are moving to make a difference in public service, business, arts, and culture. Looking for new and exciting dining experiences? Then you'll want to savor the Bronx and try new restaurants and eateries that fill the borough with delicious dishes. We have it all, so experience the Bronx in new and fresh ways on BronxNet.
They address and identify, louder. Here we go. Bring the mic closer. So I'll start again. Hi everyone, welcome to our panel discussion where we have a very distinguished panel where we're going to talk about how we identify and address issues of source of income and tenant harassment discrimination. Okay? So first we're all going to introduce ourselves. We're just going to give you our name, our agency, and our position at the agency. I'll go first. I'm Sapna Raj. I am the Assistant Commissioner for Law Enforcement in the Law Enforcement Bureau at the Commission.
Hi, I'm Nicole Summers. I'm a staff attorney at the Bronx Defenders in the Civil Action Practice.
Hi, my name is Rini Fonseca Sabuni. I'm a staff attorney and Skadden Fellow at the Community Development Project at the Urban Justice Center.
Hi, my name is Amy Hammersmith, and I'm in the Queens Office of Legal Services NYC, which is citywide, and I'm the coordinating attorney for the Fair Housing Project.
So just a few things. In every one of your packets, you've got an index card. So if you've got a question, what we're going to ask you to do is to write your question on that index card for the panel. And then both Chris and Liz, who were the presenters before, are going to walk up and down the aisles to collect those cards, and then we're going to answer the questions at the end. So first we're going to have a panel discussion, and then we're going to respond to your questions. Okay? They don't have any cards?
They told me it was reserved packages.
I'll give you mine.
Looks like he got one.
I think Dana gave one.
He got him? Okay. So if you don't have one, just let one of the commission staff know, all right? I guess what I want to start with first is to ask the panel to address one at a time. How do source of income and tenant harassment cases come to your organization? I know like some of you have the public walking in, some of you have tenant organizations that come to you. So you want to go first, Nicole?
Sure. So my office identifies or takes cases a number of different ways. One is we represent individual tenants in housing court through the HRA program, where we identify tenants in court who are being evicted and we take their eviction cases. So oftentimes that will also lead to issues around income, source of income discrimination, other forms of discrimination, and then we'll take on those cases separately for the same clients. We also have an open intake process where people can walk in or call in and we can assess whether they're eligible, and we'll also get cases that way. The third way is through the other practices in our office, the criminal unit, or the family unit, or the immigration unit. If they have clients who are facing these issues, they can refer them to us. Thanks.
So our office works closely with community-based organizations all over the city, and we primarily represent groups of tenants. So we'll represent everyone or the majority of tenants in a building or in a number of buildings, bringing affirmative litigation against certain landlords. So generally, the way we get cases is community organizers or community-based organizations. Here in the Bronx, we work with CASA, we work with Northwest Bronx Community and Clergy Coalition, we work with groups in Queens, in Brooklyn, and in Manhattan. So those organizations and the community organizers there will bring us cases where they've seen these issues take place.
So ours is fairly similar. We have sometimes attorneys in our office who work in other units will refer cases where they think there's a discrimination issue. We do work with community organizations in all the different boroughs, and they will refer cases. We also have a citywide hotline, which I might as well give out. So people can call this hotline with issues if they think they're being discriminated against or if they have other legal questions, which is 917-661-4500.
You want to repeat that?
Oh, sorry. Yeah, let me repeat that again. It's 917-661-4500. I
have someone. But if you have an employment claim or you have a claim because you were treated differently in a public space, like a hospital or a theater or a store, then you have a right to come forward and give us a tip and remain anonymous if you want to. So you can give us details. We will look at it and see whether we want to investigate it further. There are many ways in which we can investigate it. One of the ways is to, do testing. So we can send testers out to see whether that actually is happening. So someone says, I went to this apartment complex and they said they won't accept a voucher, but I just don't have the time because I'm too busy looking for housing to, file a claim. Then we can test that housing provider or real estate agent to see whether there is discrimination or not. Okay? And then we can file a claim as the commission. We can file a complaint as the commission. And so let me move on and ask whether you think there have been a difference in the number of claims you've seen in either source of income or tenant harassment in the last year.
I think one of the issues is that, I'll just say this, I think the Human Rights Commission has become much more active in the past few years, and so I think people are more aware of it. Our office has seen a lot more income discrimination, source of income discrimination claims in the last year. And part of that, I think, has to do with the gentrification of various neighborhoods. And I think part of that is because people are becoming more aware that it is a form of discrimination.
We are seeing a huge amount of tenant harassment, and I think it's increasing as gentrification, increases in different neighborhoods in New York City as it gets farther and farther out in the boroughs. I think, within the past year, I wouldn't say it's gone from X percent to Y percent, but it's always, it's kind of been at this really high level, and it continues to be at that high level. So it's something we're seeing and we continue to see.
Can I have each one of you talk about how do you what do you do when a case comes in? How do you determine whether it's a case of discrimination, either tenant harassment or source of income? Do you want to go first, Nicole?
So those cases, usually we're working with clients who are in the middle of the housing search. We really advise them to keep very diligent records of their housing search and to mark down every broker or landlord that they call and what the response, if any, was. In some cases, we've had clients come in who've already done that, who can already tell us, oh, this person, that person told me no programs, and that's of course very helpful, and we can just start from there. In other cases, we sort of advise clients about how to make those initial phone calls in a way that will help suss out whether they're being discriminated against. So one thing we always advise clients is, to first ask, do you have available apartments for X amount, and get the broker or landlord to say yes, and then, see if they ask about source of income.
We are often working with tenants after they're living in the apartment, so it's a different stage, and the landlords are trying to drive them out in order to get the vacancy increase or in order to do individual apartment improvements. So I would say when an organizer comes to us with a building and they say, we think harassment is happening here, we think discrimination is a part of it, our job then as the attorneys is to dig deeper. And often tenants will say, oh, this landlord is racist, the super is racist, whatever. And what we need to do is meet with each of the individual tenants and really understand their story and see if there could be a claim of discrimination, which is more complicated in some ways than the other types of harassment we see. So we try to determine, based on interviews and developing affidavits with each tenant, can we bring a discrimination claim? Is there proof? Is there a nexus between the adverse action that the staff attorneys referred to earlier and a protected class? So are we seeing it against elderly people, against families with children, against people of color, or is it that the landlord is an equal opportunity jerk, or is it against these specific protected classes? So that's kind of the digging we do after we get the case.
Yeah, it's pretty similar for us. I don't think I would add a whole lot except to say, we do a lot more individual cases, and it requires asking a lot of questions. Who else lives in the building? Who else is experiencing this? Are they willing to talk to us as well? Do the new people, because we also represent a lot of existing tenants who've been in a building for a while and are experiencing discriminatory harassment or just plain straight up harassment, because landlords have an incentive to try to turn those apartments over. So asking them, how long have you been in the building? The new people coming into the building, do they look like you? Do they come from the same part of the world as you? Do they have children? Do they not? Are they younger? Those sorts of things. And then, also looking at documentary evidence to the extent we can get it, looking at things like rent rolls, that sort of information can be useful.
So at the commission, we do pretty much what everyone else does. We're lawyers, so we ask the questions that everyone else on the panel said that they ask. One of the things I would say is that if you are an individual coming to us with complaints about source of income, as much information as you can give us about the person that you were in contact with is really helpful. So sometimes we get individuals who come in with little slips of paper in which they've written down just a phone number. So that becomes a little bit more difficult for us to investigate. So more information we get, the better. And with something like source of income, if we're looking for a pattern and practice, we are looking to see if the landlord comes back and says, oh no, I've got lots of Section 8 people in my building. Well, then you really want to know, you may have a lot of people with Section 8 in that building, but when did they move in? And when did you buy that building? So you've got people there from 1995 who've got Section 8, but you bought that building in 2015, and now suddenly, since then, how many people have you admitted in, allowed them to rent apartments who have vouchers? So those are some of the questions we look at. And I guess I guess the other thing I want to ask is, how do you determine there's a pattern of discrimination? So, in all of our organizations, we have individual lawyers. So I may get a case, and then you may get a case in the same organization, but how do we connect the two? How does your organization make sure to realize that there may be the same landlord who's showing up or the same broker who's showing up as a discriminator? Whoever wants to go first.
So our office, it's harder, frankly, for us to do across the city between offices, but our office in Queens is not that huge. And so I just have a lot of conversations with the other attorneys in the office. We're also really lucky in that a couple times recently, someone has come in, we've spoken with them, and they've gone back to speak to other people in their building, and then people have come in en masse with almost identical complaints, which really makes our job very easy. That doesn't always happen, but certainly encouraging people to speak to their neighbors really helps.
We work directly in coalition with community partners all over the city and explicitly in coalitions that look at these issues. So the Stand for Tenant Safety or Stabilizing NYC will look and identify certain landlords that have repeatedly had these issues. So I think, on the micro level, we're looking in buildings and developing the case and looking at, is each person or each tenant, each Hispanic tenant in this building coming to us with the same stories? And the same thing happens where you see the exact same pattern or the exact same kind of intimidation. But on a citywide level, on a macro level, we're looking at landlords across neighborhoods and across boroughs and trying to see the same practices, the same illegal practices applied, and putting pressure on those landlords on a citywide level, where landlords, especially bigger landlords, may not be concerned if a single tenant is bringing allegations or bringing a complaint, especially the landlords that are wealthier, they might not be concerned about that. Whereas when we're able to represent multiple buildings, we can put more pressure on the landlord in that way.
For us, we tend to see it most on, or where we're working with it most is on the housing search side, like I mentioned before. So that can be hard to identify the patterns because oftentimes clients are working with brokers, and there are tons and tons of brokers, as everyone knows. And so people come to us with these long lists of brokers that they feel they've been discriminated by. So it's sort of up to us to put that together and try to see, the common names across those lists and, across the stories that we hear from clients. Yeah, that's a great idea. Yeah.
So at the commission, we do a combination of all those things. We work with community organizations and other legal organizations to identify where there may be systemic discrimination going on. So we meet then with tenant organizers or with tenants to see whether, so sometimes we've done like surveys of tenants. Amy and I have worked on things like that, where we do surveys to determine what is the discriminatory act that's happening there. What are the issues that are showing up? The other way is just within our office, we know, before we file a complaint, we usually do a search to see whether there are other complaints that have been filed against that landlord or that broker. And that's one way we know, we have another complaint on this. And sometimes it's because a group of people come to us and say that they've got an issue. The other way is to do testing. So we do multiple tests of the same landlord or the same real estate broker to make sure that we have a strong enough case to show that there was discrimination. Okay? And let me ask you about cases that you all have filed with the commission, and if you could tell us a little bit about the factual part of it, and then tell me let me ask first, how do you choose where you're going to file a complaint, whether it's going to be in federal court or in state court or with the commission if it's a case of discrimination? Let's answer that first before.
Okay. So I think a lot of it, there are a lot of pieces that go into the decision. Some of it has to do with the resources you have for that case. Some of it has to do with in litigation, a lot of your discovery is going to happen before you file, not discovery, but a lot of the investigation and research is going to happen before you file a case. I think with an administrative process with the commission and some other administrative agencies, you can file a complaint. You need specific facts, but you can file a complaint, and some of the discovery will happen more informally through the process of the complaint, and the agency will be doing some of that work, which can, depending on how much, how many resources you have, can be more efficient. Some of it is the comfort of the client. Some clients are incredibly intimidated by the thought of appearing in something like federal court, but the idea of talking to somebody friendly in the city agency sounds doable to them. And so that's a big part of it, and I won't take up all of these, but another one is just the city law is much broader and covers a lot of things that the federal and state laws don't. So there are some claims that you just can't really bring in other forums.
Like source of income.
Like source of income.
Yeah, I would echo what Amy said. And when we get a harassment claim, which we get all the time, we're just trying to kind of triage it and figure out what the most important interests of those tenants are. And because we work with groups, that requires working with the organizers and figuring out what is most important. Is this something that is very time sensitive? Do people feel urgency? In that case, if they need repairs right away, we might be able to get something a little more quickly in housing court. However, are we going, the ways in which we're able to address discriminatory harassment in housing court may leave the tenants feeling dissatisfied because that forum isn't great for really raising these claims and giving the tenants an opportunity to be heard. So we may decide to couple an HP with a discrimination complaint in front of the commission and put those two together. Because we're also working with organizers and community groups, we're always in communication with them about the organizing strategy and the timing, and they may want to have a big press conference the day of a filing, so we're trying to figure that out. I think that the issues around the federal laws being less protective that's very real, and if we are looking at protected classes that aren't protected under federal law, but looking at some classes that are, could we bring that together? Could we look at supplemental jurisdiction? Yes, but do the clients want to go to a federal court? So these are all the questions we're looking at. Some clients are tired of housing court. They've been there, a ton of time, and they don't feel like that's a place where they're getting justice. So they may be eager to be in a different forum. So I think we're always kind of looking at those. It's a very dynamic and iterative process with each new filing, with each new group of tenants. We're looking at those interests and the outcome they need and the timing.
Yeah, I don't have much to add. It's pretty similar factors that we look to as well. I think that a lot of our cases, they're pretty time sensitive, and timing is sort of the essence. And so usually for us, that's meant that filing with the Human Rights Commission makes the most sense for us. But we look at all the same factors everyone's talked about.
So if each of you could talk about the cases that you filed with the commission.
So we have filed several cases recently on the basis of SEPS discrimination. So SEPS is a voucher available to single individuals who have faced homelessness. And we've had several clients who have just faced rampant discrimination, who come in with long lists of brokers who've told them no programs, no SEPS specifically. In one case, the client called a broker, said, do you have I'm looking for a one bedroom that's $1,200 or less. The broker said yes, and then he said, oh, and what's your source of income? And he said, oh, I have a SEPS voucher, but it's for $1,213, so that's great. He said, oh, no, none of the landlords we work with take SEPS. And that's a really common sort of story that we hear, is that the brokers are sort of the gatekeepers, of course, to the landlords, and say, oh, no, it's the landlords, none of the landlords will accept your voucher, in this case SEPS, which of course is illegal for them to be serving as a gatekeeper in that role. but that's often the fact pattern that we're seeing. That was the one in the particular case, and on the advice of the commission, in some of these cases, we have called the brokers following the client's contact with them with the goal of trying to convince them to still rent the, informing them that what they're doing is illegal, asking them to, go back on what they said and, show the available apartment. And I have done that in that case and in others, and have been told very expressly by brokers, oh no, we just, we won't get any business if we don't follow the landlord's rules. And so, too bad, you can go ahead and file your complaint. So.
When they get some damages,
punitive damages.
And civil penalties.
And penalties, yeah. So I wanted to discuss a group case we filed in Sunset Park. And, in that case, I think it brings together some of the themes we were talking about. It was a new landlord who came in and began kind of rampantly harassing all of the Hispanic tenants in the building, which it was a 16-unit building, and at the time was all Hispanic tenants, and since that time that has changed. But I think one of the challenges and one of the reasons we decided not to bring this case in federal court was because, when you have all tenants of a single ethnic group, you're not seeing the comparators, which are, people of different, where you can really compare. And we could reach that through testing. Our office doesn't do testing. Some organizations do, the Commission, the Fair Housing Justice Center. But for us, at the time, we knew that we didn't have that piece of the puzzle, which would have made our case stronger in federal court. So the landlord brought the building and just started kind of targeting tenants, and all of the tenants were rent stabilized and rent controlled. We know that's not a protected class, but the themes that we're seeing are, well, many of these tenants are elderly, and the landlord is making comments like, well, this apartment is too big for you at this age. You can't maintain an apartment like this. You should, shouldn't you move in with your child? Comments that were specifically targeted toward, elderly folks, and we saw that with several of the elderly folks in the building. We also saw that the landlord was harassing young people of color in the building, accusing them of dealing drugs, screaming at them for no reason, no evidence, no police reports, nothing, just screaming at them and not allowing them into the building sometimes. And I think, the first time you hear this, you as an attorney, you kind of take notes, you're taking it in. But the third and fourth and fifth time, and this is an apartment with 16 units. And so you're seeing over half, over 2/3 of the tenants in the building seeing this discriminatory treatment on the basis of their race and ethnicity, threats of deportation. So we're seeing the discrimination on the basis of national origin or the documentation status. So in that case, there were some urgent concerns with respect to heat, hot water, and so we filed an HP in housing court to try to get some of those repairs addressed right away. But the tenants really wanted the discrimination addressed, and the organizer also felt this had to be addressed. Another issue we saw in that building was the landlord intimidating and threatening the children, the families with children, screaming at them, going to their apartments late at night, and the children really feeling afraid and not knowing where to do, and seeing, that their grades dropping in school after these really intimidating interactions. And so we filed the case for discrimination on all of those grounds, the age, ethnicity, race, and family status and presence of children. And I think one piece of the puzzle that was important for us, and I mentioned before working with organizers and having this organizing strategy alongside the legal strategy, the press conference on the day that we filed the complaint, the press conference was on the steps of the building, and all of the tenants turned out. They spoke at the press conference, and the most compelling speaker was an 11-year-old girl, Samantha Bravo, who had been, cowering in her room, who had been intimidated and afraid by because of the actions of the landlord, and was able to kind of turn that around and then be a representative for her community, stand alongside a New York City council member, and really show that she knew her rights and that she was a person who could, say that this is not allowed, this is illegal, these actions will not be tolerated. So I think certainly we want to use the legal remedy that the commission offers us, but I think an important piece of the puzzle is also looking at the non-legal strategies that can also empower community members.
So the themes are pretty similar, I think, in all of what we're talking about. We filed actually a number of cases. There's a series of buildings in a neighborhood that's rapidly changing in Queens, where I work. And we saw two people came in, they had HASA, and they had been in the apartments for a long time. They were, I don't know if everyone knows what scatter site is, but they were scatter site tenants. And they said that they had been sued in a holdover and told that they had no rights to the apartment. And through a lot of word of mouth and some visits to the building, it turned out that a large portion of the tenants in the building had HASA, were in scatter site situations, were people of color, many of them senior citizens, and they were all being taken to housing court in holdover proceedings. And the landlord's view was that, well, nobody's going to notice if these people are moved out. And fortunately, the tenants were very courageous and were willing to fight, and I can't talk too much about it, but things have ended well, generally, for most of the tenants. And it doesn't resolve, I think what Rini was saying is really important. It doesn't completely resolve the problem of what happened to the tenants who moved out before they knew that they had rights. And it doesn't necessarily resolve the problem of landlords believing that they can sort of quietly buy up buildings and empty them out and then refurbish them and rent them at much higher rates. But it did give us an avenue to push back against this, and this is a rent-stabilized building. So in addition to keeping the apartments for the tenants who really wanted to stay there, and in some cases had medical conditions which made it very hard for them to move to another borough, which is where they were being told they had to move. In addition to that, it preserved affordable housing for at least some group of people, which I think is very important at this point in this city.
So I'll talk about the commission. Of course, we have a lot of cases where complainants have come in and alleged that landlords and brokers or management companies are discriminating against them. But I'll talk to you a little bit about a commission-initiated case that, several cases that we brought. One is on source of income. So we filed as the commission along with complainants who came in saying that they were being discriminated against, and the way they were being discriminated against was because when they went to apply for an apartment, they were told they had to, even though they had a voucher that fully paid for the rent, they were told they had to make 40 times the rent. So, there's no need for someone to make 40 times the rent if your voucher is going to cover your rent. So we filed as the commission along with complainants. We have other cases in which the commission stepped in because tenants in a building were afraid to come forward because they're elderly and they were being discriminated against because they felt because of their national origin and their race. And so the commission stepped in and filed a complaint against them. So there are several different ways that can happen. So I think we're coming to the time to an end when we are going to speak. So I'm going to answer some of the questions that were sent forward. And the first one was, is there ever a time where a voucher can be refused, or must vouchers always be accepted? That's an easy one. Under our law, it has to always be accepted. If that voucher actually pays for the rent, then the voucher has to be accepted, no matter what the voucher is. So it can be a link voucher, it can be a FEPS voucher, it can be a Section 8, it can be anything, it has to be accepted under our law.
Except in 6 or less.
Yes, that exemption, yes, the 6 units or less, that is there. So the landlord has to have, I'm sorry, you can't hear me? Yeah, so except we had talked about that in the presentation. So under source of income, it has to be 6 units or more that the landlord has. So they can have one 6-unit building and then have another building in which they have only 3 units, and they discriminate in the 3-unit building, they still are covered by our law. Okay? And the other question was, are there lawyers where we can go to when we have housing questions? You've got us here. And you also have people who are at the tables in the back. So you can ask questions of the people who are from legal services and the commission and other organizations in the back, if you've got questions, okay? And let's see, I think we have time for one more question. Oh, let me ask you this, Amy. How do you deal with landlord broker management discriminating based on credit scores? Asking for 700 or above as a credit score.
That's a good question. So I have to be honest, I have not gotten that in our office, but there is actually HUD had put out some language, which wasn't as strong as I think people might like, but suggesting that may be a problem. And I don't know the exact wording of that, but I know that there is some stuff floating out there that can tie it into discrimination.
So under our law, under the New York City human rights law, credit score is not covered under our law for housing. But if your voucher is going to cover all of your rent, then there really is no need to pull a credit score. And we can argue something which I'm not going to go into very much detail here. It's called disparate impact. Like, why are you actually asking for that from people who really the credit score is not going to matter?
Yeah. Okay. Also, I'm sorry, just to throw in there, if someone comes to you and they think they're being asked for the credit score because someone's making an assumption about them based on their race or their age or some other factor, then it might be discrimination of a different sort. And so you might want to ask some questions about, does everyone get asked this? Has everyone, there might be some research to do there.
Right. So, Rini, this question is for you. Is a pattern enough to press a discrimination case, meaning like if in a building, it's a mostly Latino building, the new landlord has admitted mostly white tenants? Is that a basis for a case?
We would, I think, look at that case and consider that if the landlord, and we have buildings like this in gentrifying neighborhoods in Brooklyn especially, we've seen where the older tenants, the rent stabilized and rent controlled tenants are African American, and then the new tenants are white, and we have so we would take that case, we would consider it a discrimination case. I think we would try to see if we could partner with an organization that could send testers, because what a tester is, for those who don't know, is people who will go to the apartment actors and who will try to apply, and you'll have an African American actor and a white actor with the same profile, and see, that way you can have a real comparison. We even have examples of buildings where the adverse action is very specifically different in African American older households versus the newer white households. For example, building-wide heat is turned off in the winter, but some households, the white households, are getting space heaters. So it's things that usually would be considered building-wide are then only applied to some of the older households. So yeah, that case we would definitely consider discrimination.
Did you want to respond to that? No. Okay. So one more question and then we'll stop. I think we've got other people who are waiting to speak. Let's see. I think I've answered this question about minimum income requirements, that is a problem when it comes to people who have, a voucher. So I'm not sure whether, the other questions we're not going to be able to get to, but please feel free to address us in the back of the room or outside, all right? Thank you very much, and thank you very much to our panel members.
I know. It's like,
is here. She represents Bronx 16th Council District. She serves as chair of the Council's Committee on Public Safety, the first woman and first person of color to hold this role. She is, as many of you here know, a passionate advocate for fair and affordable housing, and we're particularly thrilled that she's working so closely with our commission office in the Bronx to ensure that her constituents know their rights and how to access justice at the commission. Councilmember Vanessa Gibson.
Hello everyone, good afternoon. Welcome to Hostos Community College. It is such a pleasure and an honor to be here. As it was mentioned, I'm Councilmember Vanessa Gibson, proudly representing the 16th District and the Borough of the Bronx. So I thank you all for being here at our annual conference. Truly, there is no room for housing discrimination in the city of New York. We say it, we proclaim it, and we commit every day to making sure that no New Yorker is discriminated against ever when you talk about affordable housing. I want to thank the New York City Commission on Human Rights. I want to thank the New York City HPD and our borough commissioner from the commission. Thank you so much for your partnership. I am proud to work with so many housing advocates, tenant leaders, all of my colleagues in the city council, our public advocate, Tish James. We are committed every day to fighting against discrimination. And not only are we talking about it, but we're committing money where our commitment is. So I am proud to join Councilmember Mark Levine as one of the sponsors of Intro 214, which is the universal right to counsel legislation to ensure that any family facing eviction proceedings has a free attorney, free attorney when they go to housing court. We know and we believe that housing and access to affordable and quality and stable housing is a right and not a luxury. It is a part of our fundamental principles and our values. And certainly working with all of our commissioners and working with this administration, I am very proud that we recently enacted the Fair Chance Act, which is also called Ban the Box, because we want to make sure that everyone, even those that may have a criminal background, are still able to be a success story and not a statistic. We want to make sure, I always say they need a second chance. No, they need a first chance, especially our young men and women of color. So I thank all of you. This symposium is really our efforts to collaborate, to strategize, to talk about legislation and policy and budget and how we can continue to work together to invest in long-term affordable housing. Unfortunately, we're living in a crisis of homelessness, and I am one of those districts that has a large concentration of families and single adults that live in a shelter every single night. Behind those numbers are our brothers and sisters, our family members, and our neighbors. And so we want to make sure that landlords and property developers and everyone that is a part of this conversation is looking at opportunities at longevity and long-term housing. Your source of income should never be a factor in the type of housing that you receive in our city. That's a simple fact, and we want to make sure that no one is being discriminated against. When you talk about seniors and vulnerable New Yorkers, our families that are living at or below the federal poverty line, those that are low income, our immigrant communities, our LGBTQ New Yorkers, every New Yorker just wants access and opportunity. And so I thank you for your commitment. It's an honor to work with all of you to make sure that we not only demonstrate our commitment, but we provide the necessary funding that is needed. And it just so happens we are in the midst of our budget season for the FY 2018 cycle. We will begin our hearings next week, and I will be at every single hearing as a member of the Finance Committee. and certainly know that you can count on us to stand with you shoulder to shoulder to make sure that no family faces discrimination. We have to do better as a city. We have to make sure that every New Yorker knows that we are invested in their future to stabilize communities, to strengthen families, and to give them the opportunity that everyone deserves. So thank you for having me. I look forward to working with each and every one of you, and thank you once again.
We have
Run for president.
anybody run for president. Public advocate, the second highest ranking elected office in the city. She is a public advocate in every sense of the word. She serves as a direct link between New Yorkers and their government and acts as a watchdog over city agencies, like us, and investigates complaints about city services. She is also a trailblazer, making history in 2014, becoming the first woman of color to hold citywide office in New York City. Public Advocate James has worked with our office. Our offices are collaborating on many initiatives affecting vulnerable New Yorkers, and we are so pleased to have a partner in Public Advocate James. Please welcome Public Advocate Letitia James.
I just came from the funeral of firefighter William Tolley. He was 42 years old. He was married, and he has an 8-year-old daughter. And so this afternoon, this evening, from this point on, a little 8-year-old girl said that she'll no longer have her daddy. We also lost, as you know, on Sunday, 5 individuals in a horrific fire in Queens. We will funeralize them in about a week and a half. I urge all of you to just join me in a moment of silence for those who've made the ultimate sacrifices and those who have died as a result of not having fire alarms in their homes and carbon monoxide alarms in their homes. Let this be a lesson to all of us that we first need to make sure that our house is in order. And let us all know that death is certain to each and every one of you. A moment of silence, please join me. Thank you. So my name is Letitia James, and I don't hail from the Bronx. I hail from Brooklyn. Is Brooklyn here? We're outnumbered, so behave. Behave. I'm citywide now, but I used to represent parts of downtown Brooklyn, and I carry Brooklyn wherever I go. But I am now representing all 5 boroughs. And I just really want I want all of you to make some noise for one of the baddest commissioners in the city of New York, Commissioner Carmeline Morales. I hope I said that right. I always mess it up. Okay, guys in the back, you're not clapping. Give me a round of applause. Come on, let's go. She's a fearless woman, and she's taking this commission in a new direction. It's really critically important that we join her because all of you are advocates in the fight for justice. And so what do we want? We want justice, and we want it now. What do we want? Justice. And when do we want it? Now. It's really critically important that we again demand justice. You know, 60 years ago, seems like a long time ago, but during the civil rights struggle, they enacted the Fair Housing Law. And here we are 60 years later, and although they marched and they fought and they engaged in litigation, the reality is that discrimination is still with us, right? Yep. It didn't go away. It's just a little bit more covert, right? Can I get an amen? And so what we are seeing in the Office of Public Advocate as well as in the Human Rights Commission is that individuals are being subjected to discrimination in a wide range of forms, in a number of forms, including, as my sister mentioned, Councilmember Gibson, source of income discrimination. 60,000 homeless tonight. It's a tragedy, and a third of them are children. And what they tell me as I travel all throughout the city of New York is, Tish, that's my nickname, I have a voucher. I've gone to all of these brokers, but they're rejecting them. Where do I go? What do I do? And so the purpose of this event, the purpose of this conference here today is empower individuals to let them know that they can no longer be invisible, you can no longer be quiet, that the law is on your side, and that you have rights. Everyone has rights. Immigrants have rights. Refugees have rights. We all have rights. And we've got to say it loud and clear that all of us have rights, and discrimination will not be tolerated in this city. If we are a progressive city, then all of us must be ambassadors of justice. Not just me, not just the council member, and not the commissioner, but each and every one of you. Yes, she and I in our respective places are the first women of color. So what? Means nothing if you do nothing with it. And my question to all of you is, what are you doing with the power that you have in your hand? And the power that you have in your hand is the knowledge that you will learn today. And the knowledge that you will learn today is that discrimination is illegal. So individuals with voucher who are homeless, they go to brokers, they say, no, I don't think I want to accept that because, and the reason why they discriminate is because under the previous administration, we had this program called Advantage. Remember that? Somebody else, so you know what I'm talking about, right? Okay, let me talk to the young people in the back who are looking at me like, what? Yeah, Advantage. Advantage was a program that was put forth by the former mayor, Mayor Bloomberg, and with Governor Cuomo. And then in midstream, they cut it off, right? They just cut it off midstream. And people were getting evicted left and right. And landlords were saying, hey, you know, I bought into this program. What happened? And they were left holding the bag. And so landlords, not all of them, but some of them, I feel a little bit nervous about, again, entering into another program, thinking that perhaps the possibility may exist that the city, for some reason, may once again cut the program off and I will be left holding the bag. And so maybe I'll give them an out. That could be the reason. But also, perhaps they just don't want to deal with individuals who are formerly homeless because of the stereotype of individuals who are homeless, right? But the reality is that a significant number of people who are homeless are homeless not because they want to be homeless, not because they're shiftless, not because they're lazy. It's because they can't find affordable housing because rent is too what? Damn high. You could say it, we're at Hostos, damn high. Too damn high. The president said it was okay. And that's why they are homeless. And that's why they are homeless. And so we've got to overcome some stereotypes. We've got to deal with the discrimination. We've got to make sure government is doing its job, making sure if you're a landlord and you house someone who's formerly homeless, then you too should be paid. We also have to deal with my friends in the LGBTQ community. You know, there was once a time when they were discriminating against African Americans. And now, the LGBTQ community. Any members of the LGBT community? Come on, are you out and proud? Make some noise. Woo! So members of the gay community, they're being discriminated against. People who are transgender are being discriminated. Anybody who is other is being discriminated against, right? And so what we've got to do is say discrimination is unacceptable, be it an African American, a Latino, or Muslim, a member of the LGBT community, someone who's formerly homeless. All of us need to rise up and raise our voices. Again, you forget, you're ambassadors of justice, and you too have got to raise your voice. And so it's really critically important because we know that bad actors don't sleep, which is why we must be persistent. And while we've come a long way from redlining and blatant racial housing discrimination, we still face battles. Even individuals with disabilities and even senior citizens are being discriminated. And even women with children or families with children are being discriminated against. Some landlords just don't want children. And so again, that is illegal as well. And so it's really critically important. Now landlords would tell you, hey, I've got rights and I can discriminate against who I want to. Isn't this America? Yes, it is America. But we've got laws. And the Fair Housing Law, which is a federal law, is clear. We also have laws in the state and in the city that protect all of these different and disparate groups. And it's really critically important that we stand up and raise our voices. And this is an issue that I've been focusing on long before I became a public advocate, when I was a public defender, when I was an assistant attorney general, and it's been a cornerstone of my work. And so that's why I fought alongside tenants and the Commission on Human Rights against the discriminatory policy at Stonehenge Village on the Upper West Side that denied elderly, rent-regulated tenants access to amenities. You heard about it. So rent-regulated tenants weren't allowed access to the gym. They weren't allowed access to the pool. All the amenities in these fancy buildings. If you're rent-regulated, rent-stabilized, if you're not allowed amenities and only the market rate tenants, the tenants who paid $3,000, $4,000, $5,000, that's illegal as well. We found out about it on the Upper West Side. We joined with the Commission on Human Rights. We joined with others, and guess what? We won. It took 2 years, but we were victorious in reaching a milestone settlement that guarantees equal access and treatment, and that landlords change the policy. Make some noise for changing that policy. Come on. It's really critically, you also heard about poor doors and all of that. Individuals should not be segregated, right? We should all have access to fair treatment and equal treatment in the city of New York. And again, as ambassadors of justice, I need all of you to have eyes and ears on issues such as this around the city of New York. And most recently, my office released a report revealing the scope and severity of housing discrimination against transgender and gender nonconforming people in New York City, the harassments, the threats, and the disrespect this community faces when attempting to secure safe homes has absolutely no place in New York City and is absolutely illegal under our fair housing law. I applaud the Commission on Human Rights for the work that they have done to protect the transgender and gender nonconforming community, but also know that they are underfunded and under-resourced. So, as ambassadors, you're gonna get some homework. This is your homework, okay? They are underfunded. On average, it takes a significant amount of time to go through the full investigation and to come to some sort of resolution. We are, as was mentioned by my colleague, Councilmember Gibson, we're in the midst of the budget, right? And so I need the administration and the city council to show them some love by showing them some money. They need more resources. If we are serious about discrimination against all of the groups that I mentioned, people who are formerly homeless, the Muslims, African Americans, Latinos, LGBTQ, non-conforming, we need to get them more money. More money, because I'm from Brooklyn. More money. So say, show me the money. Oh, you're not serious about getting her more money? Say, show me the money. Show me the money. Now, how do you do that? What we all need to do is we need to communicate to the administration. Okay, she's supposed to turn her head because I'm lobbying now. This is not her, this is me, Letitia James. If they say, who told you to call? Say, Letitia James, that public advocate, you know her. Tell the administration of the city of New York that in this year's budget and the city council that we need more money in their budget so that they can hire more investigators, more lawyers, and more staff members so that we can increase the agency. If we are serious about discrimination, if we are serious about making sure that everyone has equal access to the law, that no one is discriminated, then I need to make sure that her budget is just bubbling over, right? Her cup runneth over. That's what we need to do. And so during this period, the next 4 weeks is critical, my friends, my ambassadors, my co-ambassadors. You need to reach out to the administration and to every city council member in the city of New York. Tweet them, email them, Facebook them, whatever social media you use, or if you're old school like me, write a letter and tell them they need more money so that they can ensure that there is no room for discrimination in New York City. It has to be more than words. It has to be real. And if we are going to battle individuals, again, who discriminate against all of those groups because they're different or because they're other, we need to send a strong message. And the only way that we can do this is by having a commission which is robust and a commission which has a significant number of investigators and lawyers like myself. She needs to be lawyered up because what I love about my job is because I have the ability to sue, baby, sue. So, yes, I do. Every now and then I sue. So again, my last comment is this. A lot of discrimination out there. We need to make sure that we have a robust commission. And lastly, whenever I go around the city of New York, and particularly in my beloved Brooklyn, I ask how many people were able to get apartments through the lottery. And invariably, no one raises their hands, maybe one or two. We should not be defined by our credit score. Anyone in here have perfect credit? Raise your hand. Perfect credit. One person. God bless you. Put your hand down. The vast majority of us are normal. We got student loan problems. We got, when you go to landlord-tenant court, that's even a mark on your credit report, right? So we should not be defined by our credit score. And so many individuals, particularly in New York City, because it's so expensive, we're excluded from the lottery. We work with the administration to correct that, but unfortunately, too many developers and organizations are still looking at us and defining us based on our credit score. And so what we need to do is look beyond our credit score and determine our credit worthiness based on other factors. And the administration is doing just that. We need to make sure that that's a reality in the city of New York so that individuals beside this wonderful, beautiful young woman who I'm making fun of, so that she's not the only one who can afford a beautiful apartment in one of those high luxury apartments that they're building these days that none of us can obviously get into. All of us need to be able to get into these new shiny tall buildings as opposed to people from Arkansas, right? Right? Even though people from Arkansas are really nice, they're very nice, they're very nice, they're very nice, very nice, but I want people from the BX to apply for these apartments, or Brooklyn, or Queens, or Manhattan, and Staten Island as well. That's what's critically important, and not enough of us, unfortunately, are getting apartments through the lottery system, and it's because we're excluded, because we're defined by our credit score, and they need to look above and beyond that. So, I thank all of you ambassadors for allowing me to have a few words, to say a few words, and to have some fun with you, but this is a very serious issue. No discrimination in New York City will not be tolerated. All of us must be ambassadors of the law, ambassadors of justice. We've got to work to make sure that this commission gets more money, and two, we've got to make sure that we are more than just a number. God bless you and thank you.
So on that note, thank you, Public Advocate Letitia James. Thank you so much, and thank you to Councilmember Vanessa Gibson as well. We would like to thank our gracious hosts, Hostos Community College and the Center for Bronx Nonprofits, our keynote speaker Jarrett Murphy from City Limits, and our panelists from Urban Justice Center, Queens Legal Services, and Bronx Defenders for being here and for sharing their insights and experience on these issues. As a reminder, we will be starting our second session, check-in. We'll start right after this, and we'll be ready to go between 5:15 and 5:30. So if you're staying for the evening session, get ready for more really interesting and engaging conversations. We'll be swapping out the food, so you'll be getting more food. And please do collect any materials that you did not get when you walked in. As we commemorate the 60th anniversary of the Fair Housing Law, we recognize that New York City was the first city in the country to prohibit housing discrimination. We at the Commission continue in our shared goal of leading the country in fighting discrimination with a robust anti-discrimination law and an agency committed to equality and dignity for all New Yorkers. I promise I have just 30 seconds. As Commissioner Morales noted in her opening remarks, we want to hear from you to understand how we can better meet the needs of your clients and your communities. Please do reach out to us directly. We have commission staff all over the place. Please do talk to us. If you are seeking CLE credit for this afternoon, please don't forget to sign out when you leave. We will email you the CLE certificates. And please do not forget to complete an evaluation form in your blue folders. We read them, we care about your feedback, and we will use it to inform our future programming. Thank you again for joining us this afternoon, and if you're sticking around for this evening, we will see you shortly. Thank you so much.